Story 1. The Loop on Highway 50. Marcus Wheaton had been driving 18-wheelers across the American heartland for 23 years, and he thought he'd seen everything the road could throw at him. Blizzards in Wyoming, dust storms in Arizona, fog so thick in Oregon you couldn't see your own hood. None of it fazed him anymore. He was a professional, meticulous about his logs, his maintenance schedules, and his routes. He knew the interstate system like most people knew their own neighborhood. That's why what happened on Highway 50 in Nevada during August of 2022 still haunts him, still makes him question everything he thought he understood about the world. The run itself was routine. Marcus was hauling agricultural equipment from Sacramento to a distribution center outside of Kansas City. It was a straight shot, mostly interstate, but his dispatcher had called him 2 days into the journey with a route change. There was a massive pileup on I-80 near Salt Lake City, 12 vehicles involved, and the highway would be closed for at least 18 hours. The detour would take him south through Nevada on Highway 50, the so-called loneliest road in America. Marcus had driven it before years ago, and while it was desolate, it was also peaceful. Long stretches of empty desert, minimal traffic, and usually smooth sailing. He adjusted his GPS, confirmed the new route, and merged south at the interchange near Fernley. The sun was setting as he entered the true emptiness of central Nevada. The landscape was biblical in its starkness, endless sagebrush flats punctuated by distant mountain ranges that looked like they'd been carved from blue paper and pasted against the horizon. The sky was doing that thing it does in the desert, turning shades of orange and purple that seemed almost artificial in their intensity. Marcus had his CB radio on, listening to the occasional chatter from other drivers, but the frequency was mostly quiet. He passed through Austin, a tiny cluster of buildings that qualified as a town only by the most generous definition, and continued east. His GPS showed another 130 miles before he'd reach Ely, where he planned to stop for fuel and food. About 40 miles past Austin, Marcus noticed something odd. There was an old wooden sign on the side of the road, weathered gray by decades of sun and wind. It read Middlegate Station, 7 miles. He didn't remember seeing that on previous trips, but Highway 50 was dotted with remnants of old mining operations and ghost towns. Nevada was full of places that had briefly mattered and then been forgotten. He thought nothing of it and kept driving. 7 miles later, his headlights illuminated another sign, identical to the first. Middlegate Station, 7 miles. Marcus frowned. That didn't make sense. He checked his odometer. He definitely traveled 7 miles, maybe closer to 8. He looked at his GPS. The blue line showed him progressing, steadily eastward along Highway 50. Everything seemed normal. He drove on, watching the odometer more carefully now. After exactly 7 miles, there it was again. The same weathered wooden sign. Middlegate Station, 7 miles. The same angle, the same pattern of decay in the wood, the same placement relative to the road. Marcus felt a cold sensation in his chest. He grabbed his CB radio. "This is eastbound heavy on Highway 50. Anybody out there?" Static. "Anybody on this frequency?" More static. He tried his cell phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising in this part of Nevada, but still unsettling given what was happening. Marcus slowed down, his eyes scanning the landscape. Everything looked the same. The same sagebrush, the same distant mountains, the same empty 2-lane highway stretching to infinity. He passed a distinctive rock formation on his left, a stack of boulders that looked vaguely like a face. He made a mental note of it. 7 miles later, there was the sign again. And 7 miles after that, the rock formation. The exact same rock formation on his left, at the exact same distance from the road. His headlights caught it at the same angle, creating the same shadows. He was looping. Somehow, impossibly, he was driving the same 7-mile stretch of highway over and over again. Marcus pulled over onto the shoulder, his hands shaking as he put the truck in park. He grabbed a flashlight and climbed down from the cab. The night air was cool, almost cold, and perfectly still. No wind, no sound except the ticking of his cooling engine. He walked to the back of his trailer, checking the cargo straps by habit, trying to ground himself in normal routine. Everything was secure. Everything was normal. Except nothing was normal. He got back in the cab and pulled out his logbook. He'd been driving for 6 hours since his last stop. The entries were all there, written in his own handwriting, but according to his GPS, he'd only covered 40 miles in the last 2 hours. That was impossible. He'd been maintaining a steady 60 miles per hour. The math didn't work. Marcus started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. He had to break this loop somehow. He tried driving faster, pushing up to 75 miles per hour. 7 miles later, the sign appeared. He tried driving slower, crawling along at 30 miles per hour. Same result. He tried pulling over and waiting for 30 minutes. When he started driving again, the loop continued as if he'd never stopped. On what he estimated was the 15th repetition, Marcus noticed something new. There was a vehicle in the distance coming toward him, headlights approaching from the east. Relief flooded through him. Another driver, someone who could confirm he wasn't losing his mind. The vehicle got closer. It was a truck, an 18-wheeler like his. As it passed, Marcus got a clear look at it in his mirrors. It was his truck. The same model, the same color, the same company logo on the door. He saw the driver's face for just a moment in the glow of the dash lights. It was him. Marcus Wheaton, looking straight ahead, unaware. Marcus slammed on the brakes, his truck skidding to a stop in the middle of the highway. He sat there, breathing hard, watching in his mirrors as the other truck, his truck, disappeared into the darkness behind him. This wasn't just a loop in space, it was a loop in time. He was somehow overlapping with himself, with other iterations of himself, all trapped in the same 7-mile stretch of Highway 50. How many versions of him were out here? How long had he been looping? His logbook said 6 hours, but that could be wrong. Everything could be wrong. He forced himself to calm down, to think logically. There had to be a way out. The sign mentioned Middlegate Station. Maybe that was the key. Maybe he needed to find it, or maybe he needed to avoid finding it. He decided to try something different. On the next loop, when he reached the halfway point between signs, he turned off his headlights. Complete darkness enveloped him. He could barely see the road, navigating by the faint starlight and the barely visible white lines. He drove like that for what felt like miles, his heart pounding, every instinct screaming at him to turn the lights back on. Then he saw it. Off to the right, maybe a quarter mile from the highway, there were lights. Small, yellow, flickering. Buildings. Marcus turned the headlights back on and immediately saw a dirt road leading off the highway toward the lights. There was no sign marking it, no indication it existed. His GPS showed nothing. But there it was, Middlegate Station. He slowed down, debating. Every horror movie he'd ever seen told him not to investigate the mysterious buildings. But what choice did he have? He was trapped in a loop, running out of fuel, and according to his gauges, his rig was starting to show signs of strain. The oil pressure was slightly low, the temperature slightly high, as if the truck had been running for much longer than his instruments indicated. He turned onto the dirt road. The truck bounced and rattled over the rough surface. As he got closer, the buildings resolved into a small cluster of wooden structures surrounding an old gas station. The kind of place that hadn't been in business since the 1960s. There were 2 pumps out front with rounded tops and mechanical number wheels. A faded sign read Middlegate Station in letters that had once been red. Light was coming from the windows of the main building, warm and inviting. Marcus pulled up to the pumps and turned off his engine. The sudden silence was overwhelming. He climbed down from the cab, his legs stiff from hours of driving. As he approached the main building, he could see movement inside through the dusty windows. The door was propped open. He stepped inside and found himself in a small general store. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with canned goods and supplies. Everything looked old but not abandoned. A wood stove radiated heat in the corner. Behind a counter stood an elderly man in coveralls. He looked up at Marcus with no surprise, as if he'd been expecting him. "You made it," the old man said. His voice was raspy but kind. "What is this place?" Marcus asked. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, hoarse from hours of silence. "Way Station," the old man replied. "You were caught in the loop. Most folks don't figure out how to find us. They just keep driving until they run out of fuel, and then—" He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. "What happens then?" "Then you become part of the road. Permanently." The old man gestured to a map on the wall behind him. It showed Highway 50, but there were markings on it, dozens of small crosses spread along its length. Each one of those is someone who got caught and didn't make it out. Their trucks are still out there, in a manner of speaking. Driving the same loops over and over. You probably passed some of them. Marcus thought about the truck he'd seen, the one that looked exactly like his. "How do I get out?" The old man reached under the counter and pulled out an old leather-bound book. He opened it and ran his finger down a page of handwritten entries. Names, dates, some going back decades. He found a blank line and looked up at Marcus. "I need your name and the date you entered the loop," Marcus told him. The old man wrote it down carefully, then closed the book. "When you leave here, drive west. Not east, west. Back the way you came. You'll hit the loop boundary again, but this time you'll pass through it. Don't stop, don't slow down, and whatever you do, don't look in your mirrors until you see the Fernley interchange. That's it. That's it. But understand something, time works differently in the loop. When you get back to the normal world, you need to check your calendar. Might be more time has passed than you think." Marcus wanted to ask more questions, but the old man had turned away, busying himself with something behind the counter. The conversation was clearly over. Marcus stepped back outside into the cool night air. His truck was still there, looking solid and real in a way that everything else didn't. He climbed back in, started the engine, and began driving west on the dirt road back to the highway. When he reached Highway 50, he turned west as instructed. Almost immediately, he saw the wooden sign. "Middlegate Station, 7 miles. But he was driving away from it now. 7 miles later, the landscape changed. Suddenly, there was traffic. A car passed him going east. Then another. His CB radio crackled to life with normal chatter. His cell phone showed signal. Marcus kept driving, his hands tight on the wheel, not looking in the mirrors. When he finally saw the lights of Fernley in the distance, he pulled over and checked his phone. It was August 23rd. He'd entered the loop on August 17th. 6 days had passed. 6 days of his life spent driving a 7-mile loop, compressed somehow into what had felt like one long night. His dispatcher had been calling repeatedly. The company had filed a missing vehicle report. According to the GPS history, his truck had simply stopped transmitting data while on Highway 50 and then resumed 6 days later, 40 miles from where it had disappeared. Marcus completed his delivery, filed his reports, and tried to explain what had happened. Nobody believed him, of course. The company put him on medical leave, suggested he talk to someone. He never drove Highway 50 again. He retired early, unable to shake the feeling that somewhere out there, other versions of himself might still be driving that loop, unaware that they're trapped, passing themselves over and over in the darkness. Sometimes late at night he wonders about that leather-bound book in Middlegate Station, and whether his name will ever be crossed out or if it will remain there forever. A reminder that he only barely escaped becoming a permanent part of Nevada's loneliest road. Story 2. The Westbound Passenger. Jennifer Kowalski had been running independent hauls for 11 years when she picked up the load that changed everything. It was December of 2021, and she was hauling a refrigerated trailer full of pharmaceutical supplies from a facility in Pennsylvania to a hospital network in eastern Oregon. The pay was excellent, the route was straightforward, and the timeline was generous. She should have known something was off when the contract came through. Jobs that good didn't usually fall into the laps of independent operators. The big companies snatched them up. But Jennifer had bills to pay and a truck payment coming due, so she didn't ask too many questions. The pickup went smoothly. The facility was modern, clean, and efficient. They loaded her trailer, sealed it, and gave her the documentation. The cargo manifest listed various medications, all properly packed and temperature-controlled. Nothing unusual. Jennifer ran through her pre-trip inspection, checked her reefer unit to make sure it was maintaining the required 38 degrees, and headed west on I-80. The first 2 days were uneventful. She made good time across Pennsylvania and Ohio, stopped at her usual truck stops, kept her logbook current. She called her sister in Portland, checked in with her dispatcher, did everything by the book. It was somewhere in Iowa, during a fuel stop just outside of Des Moines, that things started to feel wrong. Jennifer was standing at the pump, watching the numbers roll up on the diesel display, when she noticed someone sitting in her passenger seat. Through the windshield, she could see a figure, a man, she thought, just sitting there, perfectly still. Her truck had been locked. She always locked it. She finished fueling, ran her card, and approached the truck carefully. As she got closer, she could see him more clearly. He was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned suit, dark gray or maybe brown, and a hat. One of those fedora-style hats men wore in the 40s or 50s. His face was turned away from her, looking straight ahead through the windshield. Jennifer grabbed the door handle, ready to confront whoever had broken into her truck. But when she pulled the door open, the passenger seat was empty. Completely empty. She stood there, her heart racing, staring at the vacant seat. She'd seen him. She knew she'd seen him. The security cameras would have caught it. She looked around the fuel island, but there was no one nearby. She climbed into the cab and checked everything. Her belongings were untouched. The doors had definitely been locked. They still were locked until she'd opened them with her key fob. Nothing was missing or disturbed. She sat there for a long moment, trying to rationalize what she'd seen. Sleep deprivation, maybe. She'd been pushing hard. Or maybe it was just a reflection, some trick of the light on the windshield. She shook it off and got back on the road. Interstate 80 stretched ahead of her, straight and monotonous through the Iowa farmland. Darkness had fallen and traffic was light. Her CB radio was quiet. Jennifer turned on a podcast, trying to distract herself, but she couldn't shake the image of that figure in the passenger seat. Every few minutes she found herself glancing over, making sure the seat was still empty. It always was. Miles rolled by. The podcast ended. She switched to music. Still, that creeping sensation of being watched wouldn't leave her. Near the Nebraska border, it happened again. She looked over at the passenger seat, just a casual glance, and he was there. The same man, the same suit, the same hat. This time his face was turned toward her. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat. His features were indistinct, blurred somehow, like a photograph taken with a slow shutter speed. But she could see his eyes. They were dark, impossibly dark, and they were looking directly at her. She jerked the wheel in shock, the truck swerving before she caught it. When she looked again, he was gone. "Okay," she said aloud, her voice shaky in the darkness of the cab. "Okay, this is not good." She pulled over at the next rest area, a small facility with a parking lot and bathrooms. She left the engine running, left all the lights on and walked around the truck. She checked the trailer, checked the seals, checked everything. All secure. She climbed back in the cab and grabbed her phone. Still had signal. She almost called her sister but stopped herself. What would she say? That she was seeing ghosts? That she was losing her mind? Instead, she pulled up the contract information on her tablet, looking at the details of the pharmaceutical company that had hired her. The company was called Westridge Medical Supply. She Googled them. The website looked professional, but something about it felt off. The photos were generic stock images. The contact information was minimal, just an email address and a phone number. She tried the phone number. It rang twice and then disconnected. She tried again. Same result. Jennifer felt her anxiety rising. She pulled up the pickup address and searched for it on Google Maps. The street view showed an industrial park, but the specific building was blurred out. Not uncommon for secure facilities, but combined with everything else, it made her deeply uneasy. She was sitting there trying to decide what to do when her CB radio crackled to life. A voice, male, distorted by static, said, "Don't stop in Nebraska." Jennifer grabbed the radio. "Say again? Who is this?" More static. Then the voice came through again, clearer this time. "Whatever you do, don't stop in Nebraska. Keep driving through the night. Don't stop until you reach Wyoming." The radio went dead. Jennifer tried calling out, switching channels, but there was no response. A knock on her window made her jump. It was a state trooper shining his flashlight into her cab. She rolled down the window. "Everything all right, ma'am?" he asked. His face was young, professional, concerned. Jennifer nodded, trying to compose herself. "Yes, officer. Just taking a break. Long haul. Oregon. Pharmaceutical supplies." The trooper's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "You'll want to keep moving. This rest area isn't safe after midnight. There's a better stop in York about 40 miles west. You can park there for the night." It was only 10:30. Midnight was more than an hour away. But something in the trooper's tone told Jennifer not to argue. She thanked him and started rolling up her window when he added, "And ma'am, if you see anything unusual, just keep driving. Don't try to investigate, don't try to help, just drive." Then he was gone, walking back to his patrol car. Jennifer sat there for a moment, processing. Then she put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the interstate. The trooper's warning, the voice on the CB, the figure in her passenger seat, it was all connected somehow to this load. She was sure of it now. She thought about refusing the delivery, about pulling into the next truck stop and calling her dispatcher to tell them she was done. But something stopped her. If she abandoned the load, what would happen? Would they send another driver? Would someone else end up dealing with whatever this was? The Nebraska landscape rolled by, dark and empty. Jennifer kept the truck at a steady 65 miles per hour, her hands tight on the wheel, her eyes flicking regularly to the passenger seat. Empty, empty, still empty. She passed through Lincoln around midnight. The city lights were a brief comfort, evidence of normal life continuing all around her. Then she was back in darkness, back in the empty stretch between cities. The CB radio was silent. Her phone showed progressively weaker signal until it disappeared entirely. That's when she noticed the headlights. A single vehicle far behind her, matching her speed exactly. She'd been watching it for 10 minutes, and it never got closer or farther away. It just maintained the same distance, like it was tethered to her truck by an invisible rope. Jennifer pressed the accelerator, increasing her speed to 70. The vehicle behind her sped up. She slowed down to 60. It slowed down. She took a breath and tried the CB again. "This is westbound reefer on I-80. Anybody reading me?" Static. "There's a vehicle following me. Can anybody confirm visual?" Nothing but static. Then the passenger seat wasn't empty anymore. The man was back, and this time he was fully formed, solid-looking, real. Jennifer's scream caught in her throat. He turned to face her, and his features were clear now. He was middle-aged, with a weathered face and sad eyes. When he spoke, his voice came from everywhere and nowhere, not from his mouth but from the air itself. "I tried to warn the others," he said. "I'm still trying. But most of them don't listen." "Who are you?" Jennifer managed to ask. Her voice sounded distant, strange. "Doesn't matter anymore. I've been dead for 7 years, but I'm still here, still trying to warn drivers away from this route, away from these loads. The company isn't real. The cargo isn't what they told you it is. You need to stop the truck and open the trailer." "I can't do that. The seals don't matter anymore. You're already caught in it. The only way out is through. You have to see what you're carrying." Jennifer looked back at the road. The vehicle behind her was closer now. Much closer. She could see it was a black SUV with tinted windows. No license plate visible. The man in the passenger seat, the ghost, because that's what he was, she couldn't deny it anymore, gestured ahead. "There's a rest area in 5 miles. Pull in. Open the trailer. You'll understand. And if I don't, then you'll end up like me, trapped between, trying to warn people forever, watching them make the same mistakes." He flickered, becoming translucent. 5 miles, the rest area, please. I can't do this anymore. Someone has to break the cycle." He vanished. The passenger seat was empty again. Jennifer's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the wheel. She wanted to dismiss it all as hallucination, exhaustion, stress. But the black SUV was still there, real and solid and threatening. And the man's words echoed in her mind. "The company isn't real. The cargo isn't what they told you." 5 miles later, she saw the rest area sign. She almost drove past it. Every rational part of her brain screamed at her to keep going, to get to Wyoming, to deliver the load and collect her pay and never think about any of this again. But she pulled in. The rest area was small and poorly lit, just a parking lot and a bathhouse. There were no other vehicles. Jennifer backed her truck into a spot where she had a clear view of the entrance. The black SUV didn't follow her in. It drove past on the interstate, its taillights disappearing into the distance. She sat there for a long moment, trying to build up her courage. Finally, she grabbed her flashlight and climbed down from the cab. The night air was freezing, her breath visible in white clouds. She walked back to the trailer, her boots crunching on the gravel. The seals were intact. Official-looking tags with numbers and barcodes. Jennifer pulled out her pocket knife and cut them. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. She grabbed the trailer door handle and pulled it open. The interior light came on automatically, illuminating the cargo space. For a moment, everything looked normal. Boxes and crates properly stacked and secured, the temperature gauge showing 38 degrees. Then Jennifer's eyes adjusted, and she saw what was really there. The boxes were empty. Not actually empty. She could see through gaps in the cardboard that there was something inside, but they weren't medical supplies. Each box contained personal items, wallets, keys, cell phones, clothing. The belongings of dozens, maybe hundreds of people. And photographs. Stacks and stacks of photographs, all showing the same thing. Semi-trucks pulled over on the side of the road, emergency lights flashing around them, crime scene tape visible in some shots. Accident scenes, or what were staged to look like accident scenes. Jennifer felt ice water flood her veins. She grabbed one of the boxes and pulled it down, ripping it open. A driver's license fell out. The photo showed a man in his 40s smiling. The same man who'd been sitting in her passenger seat. His name was David Garrett. Next to the license was a police report. Single vehicle accident, Interstate 80, western Nebraska. Driver fatigue suspected, no witnesses, case closed. She grabbed another box, another license, another person, another report, then another. All truck drivers, all single vehicle accidents, all on I-80 in Nebraska. Behind her, she heard an engine. The black SUV had returned, pulling into the rest area. Its headlights pinned her in place. Jennifer dropped the box and ran for her cab, her heart hammering. She climbed in, started the engine, and threw the truck into gear. As she pulled out of the rest area, she looked in her mirror. The SUV wasn't following. It just sat there, headlights on, motionless. In her passenger seat, David Garrett appeared one more time. "Drive to the nearest police station," he said. "Tell them everything. Show them the photos. They won't believe you at first, but the evidence will speak for itself. This has to end." "What about you?" Jennifer asked. "Maybe when this is over, I can rest. Maybe we all can." He smiled sadly and disappeared for the last time. Jennifer drove straight to Grand Island and pulled into the police station parking lot at 3 in the morning. The desk sergeant thought she was crazy at first, another trucker who'd been on the road too long. But when she showed him the contents of the trailer, when he saw the photographs and the police reports, his expression changed. Within an hour, there were 6 squad cars at the station. By dawn, federal agents had arrived. They took her statement over and over, confiscated the trailer, launched an investigation that would eventually uncover a network of staged accidents, insurance fraud, and multiple murders stretching back more than a decade. The company that had hired her didn't exist. The facility she'd picked up from was raided and found empty, abandoned months earlier. Her payment never came through and she lost money on the job. But she was alive, which was more than could be said for the 37 other drivers whose belongings were in that trailer. Jennifer never learned exactly how David Garrett and the others had managed to warn her, how consciousness could persist after death, how the desperate need to prevent more deaths could somehow break through the barrier between worlds. The investigators had no explanation for the ghost in her passenger seat. They focused on the physical evidence, the tangible crimes. Jennifer still drives, but she's careful now about the loads she accepts. She always researches the companies, always verifies the pickup locations, always trusts her instincts when something feels wrong. And sometimes, late at night on empty stretches of highway, she swears she can see other drivers in their trucks, accompanied by translucent figures in their passenger seats. Ghosts trying to warn them, trying to save them, trying to break cycles of violence and tragedy. She never sees David Garrett anymore. She hopes that means he found his peace. She hopes all of them did. But on I-80 through Nebraska, she always keeps her eyes on the road and her doors locked, and she never, ever stops at rest areas after midnight. Story 3. The Singing Road. Thomas Chen had been hauling freight for 19 years, and he prided himself on maintaining perfect mechanical standards. His Kenworth was immaculate, every system checked and double-checked, every service performed exactly on schedule. He didn't believe in superstitions or trucker legends. When other drivers talked about haunted highways or cursed routes, Thomas would just shake his head and change the subject. The road was dangerous enough without inventing supernatural explanations for accidents and mishaps. That rational worldview served him well until March of 2023, when he accepted a load from Chicago to Albuquerque that took him through Missouri on Highway 54. The cargo was industrial machinery, heavy and bulky but straightforward to haul. Thomas loaded up in a suburb west of Chicago on a gray, drizzly morning and headed south. He planned to take I-55 down to St. Louis, then cut west across Missouri on 54 before dropping down to I-44. It was a route he'd driven many times, efficient and usually low traffic. The weather was supposed to clear by afternoon and he'd make good time. Everything was routine, methodical, exactly the way Thomas liked it. He made it to St. Louis by early evening, stopped for fuel and food, and continued west on Highway 54. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The highway cut through rolling farmland and small towns, mostly empty this time of evening. Thomas had his satellite radio tuned to a news station, listening to the day's headlines with half his attention while the other half focused on the road. His instruments all showed normal readings. Fuel was good, oil pressure perfect, temperature exactly where it should be. The miles rolled by peacefully. It was near a town called Lynn, about an hour past Jefferson City when Thomas first heard the singing. At first, he thought it was coming from his radio, some station bleeding through on a frequency. But when he changed channels, the singing continued. It was faint but definitely there. A woman's voice, high and clear, singing words he couldn't quite make out. He turned off the radio completely. The singing persisted, seemingly coming from outside the truck, from the road itself. Thomas frowned and rolled down his window. The sound grew slightly louder. It was definitely not coming from inside the cab. He slowed down, listening carefully. The voice was beautiful in an eerie way, rising and falling in a melody that sounded both ancient and somehow wrong, like the intervals between notes weren't quite standard. As his speed decreased, the pitch of the singing lowered. When he accelerated, the pitch rose. Thomas's rational mind tried to find an explanation. Maybe it was the tires on the road surface, some peculiar interaction creating a whistling noise that his brain was interpreting as singing. Some highways were designed with grooves that hummed at certain frequencies, but he'd never heard of anything like this. He pulled over onto the shoulder and put the truck in park. The singing stopped immediately. In the sudden silence, Thomas could hear his own breathing, the tick of his cooling engine, the distant sound of a dog barking. Nothing unusual. He waited for a full 5 minutes, then pulled back onto the highway. Within seconds of reaching cruising speed, the singing resumed. It was louder now, more insistent, and Thomas could make out some of the words. Turn back, turn back. The road ahead is hunger. The road ahead is thirst. Turn back before the darkness takes you first. The hair on the back of Thomas's neck stood up. He grabbed his phone and tried to record the sound, but when he played it back, there was nothing but engine noise and wind. The singing continued, audible only in real time, impossible to capture. Thomas increased his speed, trying to outrun it. The pitch rose to an almost painful level. He slowed down. The pitch dropped, but the volume increased, as if the voice was trying to compensate, desperate to make him hear. Turn back, no water here for miles, no food, no rest, no mercy in the trials. Thomas was approaching a small town called Bell. He could see the lights ahead, a small cluster of buildings on either side of the highway. He decided to stop, maybe ask someone local about the road, see if this was some known phenomenon. But as he entered the town limits, the singing stopped abruptly, cut off mid-word. The silence was almost worse than the sound had been. Thomas drove slowly through Bell, looking for a gas station or convenience store. The town seemed normal enough. A few houses, a closed post office, a bar with neon signs in the window. But something felt off. There were no people visible, no cars moving. The bar's parking lot was empty despite the lights being on. He continued through town and back out onto Highway 54. The moment he crossed back into open country, the singing resumed, more frantic now. Turn back, she's waiting in the darkness. She's patient as the stone. She'll take your breath and leave you there alone. Thomas's hands tightened on the wheel. His logical mind was at war with the growing dread in his gut. There was no such thing as haunted highways. There was no supernatural explanation for what he was hearing. But he couldn't deny the evidence of his own senses. He drove on, determined to push through to the next major town. The landscape around him was growing darker. the sky turning from twilight to full night. His headlights carved a tunnel of light through the blackness. The singing changed, became more urgent, almost pleading. Turn back, the hunger never sleeps. It watches from the hollows, from the shadows, from the deeps. Thomas noticed that his fuel gauge was dropping faster than it should. He'd filled up in St. Louis less than 200 miles ago. He should have more than half a tank, but the needle was showing less than a quarter. He checked his other gauges. The temperature was climbing, not dramatically, but noticeably. His oil pressure was slightly lower than normal. Nothing critical yet, but everything was trending in the wrong direction. And he was starting to feel strange himself, thirsty, despite having drunk a bottle of water less than an hour ago. His mouth felt dry, his throat scratchy. The singing had changed again. Now it was just repeating two words over and over. Turn back, turn back, turn back, turn back. Thomas saw a rest area sign ahead. 1 mile. He desperately wanted to stop, to take a break, to figure out what was happening. But something told him that stopping would be a mistake. The singing seemed to sense his hesitation. It grew louder, more insistent. Don't stop, she's waiting there for you. Don't stop, she'll never let you through. Thomas gripped the wheel and kept driving past the rest area exit. As he passed it, he caught a glimpse of the parking area. There was a truck there, pulled into a space. It looked abandoned, covered in dust. And standing next to it, illuminated briefly by his headlights, was a figure. A woman, tall and impossibly thin, her skin pale as paper, her eyes dark hollows. She was watching him. As his truck passed, she started walking toward the highway. Thomas pressed harder on the accelerator. His truck surged forward, the engine roaring. Behind him, in his mirrors, he could see the figure standing on the shoulder now, perfectly still, watching him flee. The singing changed one final time, becoming almost triumphant. You've seen her now, you've seen her face. She knows your scent, she knows your trace. Run faster, driver, win the race. Thomas didn't need to be told twice. He pushed his truck to 75, then 80 miles per hour, watching the rest area disappear behind him. The fuel gauge was dropping visibly now, the needle moving as he watched. Whatever was happening, it was draining his truck of fuel at an impossible rate. His temperature gauge was climbing into the red zone. Thomas had maybe 20 miles before his engine would overheat, or he'd run out of fuel completely. He grabbed his CB radio. This is eastbound heavy on Highway 54. Does anybody copy? I need immediate assistance. Static roared back at him, but underneath it he could hear something else. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breaths, like someone was holding the microphone close to their mouth. A voice came through, not the singing voice, but something else, deeper and more menacing. You should have turned back, Thomas Chen. You should have listened to the warnings. Now you're hers, and she's so very hungry. The radio went dead. Thomas threw it aside and focused on the road ahead. There had to be a town soon, somewhere with people and light and normal reality. The singing had stopped, replaced by a sound like wind rushing through a tunnel, even though his windows were closed. His headlights caught a sign. Rolla 38 miles too far. He'd never make it. But what choice did he have? Thomas kept his foot on the accelerator, watching his gauges deteriorate. Temperature in the red. Fuel gauge on empty. Oil pressure dropping. His truck should have already shut down, but it kept running as if something was keeping it alive just long enough to play out this scenario to its conclusion. The darkness on either side of the highway seemed to press in, deeper and more absolute than normal night. His headlights barely penetrated it. Then he saw lights ahead. Not a town, but a single building on the side of the road. A diner, its neon sign glowing pink and blue. Rosie's Diner, open 24 hours. Thomas had never been so grateful to see signs of civilization. He pulled into the parking lot, his truck shuddering and knocking. The moment he put it in park, the engine died with a terminal-sounding wheeze. Steam hissed from under the hood. Thomas sat there for a moment, his hands shaking, trying to process what had just happened. He climbed down from the cab and looked around. The parking lot was empty except for his truck. The diner looked like something from the 1950s, all chrome and tile. Through the windows, he could see someone moving inside. Thomas walked to the door and pulled it open. A bell jingled cheerfully. Inside, the diner was pristine, everything gleaming and clean. Sitting at the counter was an elderly woman in a pink waitress uniform. She looked up at Thomas and smiled. "You made it," she said. "Not many do." "What is this place?" Thomas asked. His voice was hoarse. "Safe Harbor," the woman replied. "The Singing Road has been here for as long as anyone can remember, maybe longer. It tries to warn people, tries to make them turn back. But most drivers are too stubborn. They think they're hearing things, hallucinating. They keep going until they run out of fuel, and then she gets them. The woman at the rest area? The hunger, we call her. She feeds on the desperate and the stranded. This stretch of highway has claimed 17 trucks in the last 20 years. Drivers who ran out of fuel, who stopped at the wrong place, who didn't listen to the warnings. The old woman gestured to a booth. "Sit. You look like you could use some coffee." Thomas sat, his legs weak. The woman brought him coffee in a thick ceramic mug. It was hot and strong and real. He wrapped his hands around it, drawing comfort from the warmth. "How do I get out of here?" he asked. "You wait until morning. The hunger can't touch you while you're in here." This place exists outside her reach. When the sun comes up, you'll be able to start your truck. It'll run fine, all your fuel will be back, temperature normal. You drive straight through to I-44 and you never come back to Highway 54, that's the deal. Deal with who? With whatever force keeps this place standing. Good against evil, light against dark, take your pick. I don't pretend to understand it. I just pour coffee and keep the lights on. She refilled his mug without asking. "You should try to sleep. The booths are comfortable enough." Thomas wanted to argue, to demand more answers, but exhaustion was overwhelming him. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him hollow and spent. He stretched out in the booth, using his jacket as a pillow. The old woman dimmed the lights. Through the window, Thomas could see his truck sitting in the parking lot, steam no longer rising from the hood. Beyond it, the darkness pressed close, and somewhere in that darkness he knew she was waiting. The hunger. Patient as stone, just like the singing had warned. He must have slept because when he opened his eyes, pale dawn light was filtering through the diner windows. The old woman was gone. The diner was silent. Thomas stood up, his body stiff and sore. He walked to the door and looked out. His truck sat where he'd left it, but it looked different in the daylight. Cleaner somehow, more solid. He walked over to it and climbed into the cab. The keys were in the ignition where he'd left them. He turned them, expecting nothing. The engine started immediately, running smooth and quiet. Thomas checked his gauges. Full tank of fuel, normal temperature, perfect oil pressure, everything exactly as it should be. He looked back at the diner. Through the windows, he could see that it was empty inside. Not just empty of people, but empty of everything. No counter, no stools, no equipment. Just an empty shell of a building. Thomas put the truck in gear and pulled back onto Highway 54. In the daylight, it looked like any other rural highway. Normal, peaceful, boring. He drove straight to I-44 without stopping, made his delivery in Albuquerque 2 days later, and filed his trip report with no mention of what had happened. Who would believe him? He barely believed it himself. But he never took Highway 54 through Missouri again. He'd plot routes that added hours to his trips just to avoid it. And sometimes, late at night, when he's driving through darkness on some lonely highway, he thinks he hears it, faint and far away, a woman's voice singing words of warning. He always listens now. He's learned that some roads carry more than just traffic, and some warnings come from places beyond human understanding. The singing road taught him that rationality has its limits, and that the universe is stranger and more dangerous than any mechanical system he could ever master. His Kenworth still runs perfectly, every gauge always reading exactly where it should. But Thomas Chen knows now that there are some conditions that no maintenance schedule can prepare you for, and some roads that should never be traveled after dark. Story 4. The Mirror Convoy. Rebecca Ortiz had been driving team with her husband Miguel for 14 years, running coast-to-coast routes in a matched pair of trucks. They'd built a good life on the road together, always within CB range of each other, always coordinating their stops and schedules. They were professionals, known for reliability and safety. In September of 2022, they picked up a coordinated load in Seattle, Rebecca hauling electronics, Miguel hauling computer components, both headed for a distribution center in Atlanta. It was a job they'd done a dozen times before, straight across I-90 and then south. The pay was good, the timeline reasonable, everything by the book. They left Seattle on a Tuesday morning, running in convoy formation with Rebecca in the lead. The weather was perfect, clear skies and light traffic. They made good time through Washington and into Idaho, stopping together for fuel and food, maintaining their usual routine. By the second day, they were crossing Montana, that endless stretch of highway through Big Sky country. Rebecca loved Montana. The landscapes were dramatic, the roads well-maintained, and there was something peaceful about the vastness of it all. They were maintaining radio contact, chatting intermittently about nothing important, the comfortable communication of two people who'd spent years working side by side. It was late afternoon when Rebecca noticed something odd in her mirrors. Behind Miguel's truck, she could see another vehicle. Another semi, the same model and color as Miguel's. Following at the same distance, she was leading him. She keyed her radio. "Miguel, you got a truck following you pretty close." Miguel's voice came back, relaxed and unconcerned. "Yeah, I see him. Been there for about 10 miles, not tailgating, just matching my speed." Rebecca watched the mirror. The truck behind Miguel was eerily similar to his. Same make, same paint color, even what looked like the same company logo. "That's weird. Looks just like your rig." "Probably same fleet. You know how companies buy in bulk." Miguel didn't sound worried. Rebecca let it go and focused on the road ahead, but she kept glancing in her mirrors, watching the 3-truck convoy stretch out behind her. Something about it made her uneasy, though she couldn't articulate why. The spacing was too perfect, maybe. The symmetry too precise. An hour later, she noticed another truck in the distance ahead of her. As she gained on it, she realized it looked exactly like her truck. Same model, same color, same everything. Her hands tightened on the wheel. "Miguel, there's a truck ahead of me that looks just like mine." Could be a coincidence, but Miguel's voice had lost some of its casual tone. "How far ahead?" "About a quarter mile. I'm gaining on it." Rebecca accelerated slightly, curious now. As she got closer, she could see more details. It wasn't just similar to her truck, it was identical. The same scratches on the bumper, the same pattern of road grime, the same CB antenna at the same angle. Her breath caught. "Miguel, this is my truck. I'm looking at an exact copy of my truck." "That's not possible, Becca. I'm telling you what I'm seeing." She was close enough now to see into the other truck's cab. There was a driver there wearing the same jacket she was wearing, with the same hair pulled back in the same ponytail. The driver was her. Rebecca slammed on her brakes, falling back. Behind her, Miguel's voice crackled urgently on the radio. "Becca, what's wrong? Why are you braking?" "The driver. Miguel, the driver is me. I just saw myself driving that truck." Her heart was pounding. The truck ahead maintained its speed, pulling away. Rebecca let it go. falling back to her normal cruising speed. In her mirror, she could see Miguel's truck behind her and behind him, the duplicate. She keyed the radio with shaking hands. "Miguel, look at the truck behind you. Look at the driver." There was a long pause. Then Miguel's voice came back, tight with tension. "Rebecca, that's me. I'm looking at myself in the other truck." They drove in silence for several miles, the convoy maintaining its formation. Rebecca ahead, then her duplicate, then Miguel, then his duplicate. 4 trucks where there should be 2. Rebecca's mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. Hallucination? Some kind of shared delusion? But that didn't make sense. She tried her cell phone, thinking maybe she should call someone, though she had no idea who or what she'd tell them. No signal. She tried her navigation system. It showed them on I-90 exactly where they should be, but the map looked strange. The road seemed to loop back on itself in ways that didn't match her memory of the route. "We need to stop," Miguel said. "Pull over at the next exit." "I don't think that's a good idea," Rebecca replied. Something told her that stopping would be a mistake, that they needed to keep moving. "Let's try to outrun them. Gun it on my mark. 3, 2, 1, go!" Rebecca pushed her accelerator to the floor. Her truck surged forward. In her mirror, she saw Miguel's truck accelerate as well, and behind them the duplicates matched their speed exactly, maintaining the same distance. No matter how fast they went, the convoy held formation. "This isn't working," Miguel said. "Maybe we should try slowing down, see if they pass us." Rebecca eased off the gas. The truck ahead of her slowed at the same rate. Behind her, Miguel slowed, and so did his duplicate. The convoy moved as one unit bound together by invisible threads. "Okay, new plan," Rebecca said. "On my mark, we both take the next exit. Don't signal, just turn at the last second. Ready?" She saw an exit coming up 2 miles ahead. "Get ready, wait for it, now!" Rebecca jerked her wheel to the right, taking the exit at the last possible moment. Her truck leaned hard on the turn, tires squealing. In her mirror, she saw Miguel make the same turn. And behind them, perfectly synchronized, the duplicates followed. All 4 trucks exited together, the convoy intact. "No, no, no," Rebecca muttered. The exit ramp led to a small town, barely more than a cluster of buildings around a single stoplight. Rebecca ran the red light, blowing through the intersection. Miguel followed. So did the duplicates. They were back on a rural highway now, 2 lanes cutting through farmland. The sun was setting, casting long shadows. Rebecca tried to think. They couldn't outrun the duplicates. They couldn't lose them by turning. What did that leave? "Miguel, I think we're in some kind of loop, like we're caught in a repeating pattern." "What do we do?" "I don't know. But we need to break the pattern somehow. We need to do something unexpected." Rebecca's eyes scanned the landscape, looking for options. Ahead, she saw an old dirt road leading off into a field. "Miguel, see that dirt road coming up on the right?" "Yeah. I'm taking it. Don't follow me. Keep going straight. Maybe if we split up, we can break whatever this is." "No way. We stay together." "Miguel, we have to try something. Keep going straight, circle around, and meet me in the next town. We'll figure it out from there." Before he could argue, Rebecca turned onto the dirt road. Her truck bounced and rattled over the rough surface. In her mirror, she saw Miguel continue on the highway. His duplicate followed him, and ahead of her on the dirt road, her duplicate turned as well. "Damn it!" Rebecca pounded the wheel. The dirt road cut through a cornfield, stalks brown and dry on either side. Dust billowed behind her. The duplicate stayed ahead, maintaining the same distance. Rebecca's CB radio crackled. Miguel's voice distorted by static. "Becca, I can't see you. Where are you?" "Dirt road heading east through a cornfield. Where are you?" "Still on the highway." "But Becca, there's something wrong. The road ahead looks wrong." It's curving when it should be straight and the markers don't make sense. Rebecca's truck hit a pothole hard, jarring her. Her dashboard lights flickered. When they came back on, her gauges were showing impossible readings. Speed at 85 miles per hour, but she was barely doing 40. Fuel at empty, though she'd filled up 2 hours ago. Temperature gauge spinning in circles. Miguel, my instruments are going crazy. Mine too. Everything's off. I don't know where I am anymore. The GPS stopped working. The cornfield ended abruptly and Rebecca found herself on a paved road again. But it wasn't the same road. It was wider, perfectly smooth, and the markings were fresh and bright. The duplicate truck ahead of her continued on. Rebecca followed, having no other choice. The landscape had changed. Instead of Montana farmland, she was driving through what looked like desert red rock formations rising on either side. The sky was wrong too dark for sunset, too red around the edges. Miguel, do you copy? Static. Miguel, please respond. Nothing. Rebecca felt panic rising in her chest. She was alone now, following a phantom version of her own truck through an impossible landscape. The road stretched ahead perfectly straight, disappearing into a vanishing point that never seemed to get closer. She drove for what felt like hours, though her clock showed only minutes passing. The duplicate maintained its position, always visible, never reachable. Then, ahead in the distance, she saw something new, a rest area brightly lit against the darkening sky. The duplicate truck's brake lights came on as it slowed and pulled in. Rebecca hesitated, then followed. She had nowhere else to go. The rest area was modern and clean, with a large parking lot and a building with restrooms and vending machines. The duplicate truck pulled into a parking space and stopped. Rebecca pulled in next to it. She sat in her cab for a long moment, staring at the other truck. The door opened, and the other Rebecca climbed down. She looked exactly the same, down to the smallest detail. She walked over to Rebecca's window and gestured for her to roll it down. Rebecca did, her hand trembling. The duplicate smiled. It wasn't a threatening smile, more sad than anything. "You can't keep running," she said. Her voice was Rebecca's voice, but there was something hollow about it. "What are you? What is this?" "The road between roads, the space where trucks go when they leave the normal world. You and Miguel, you've been driving the same routes for 14 years, always together, always synchronized. You became part of the pattern, and sometimes when you drive long enough, often enough, you start to bleed through into the other side. I don't understand. You don't have to, you just have to choose. You can stay here, in the loop, driving forever with your reflection. Or you can let go." The duplicate gestured to the rest area building. "He's in there. Miguel. His duplicate brought him here too. You can both let go together, or you can drive the loop forever. Those are the only options." Rebecca climbed down from her truck, her legs shaky. She walked toward the building, the duplicate following a few steps behind. Inside, the rest area was empty except for Miguel, sitting at a table looking exhausted and frightened. When he saw Rebecca, relief flooded his face. They embraced, holding each other tight. Behind them, the two duplicates stood in the doorway, watching. "What do we do?" Miguel asked. "She said we have to let go," Rebecca replied. "I don't know what that means." The duplicates spoke in unison, their voices creating an eerie harmony. "You have to release the pattern. You've been driving the same routes, the same schedules, the same everything for so long that you've worn a groove in reality. The road knows you too well. You have to break free of the repetition." "How?" Miguel demanded. "Choose something different. Choose to leave the road, choose to stop driving, or choose to stay here in the loop, forever becoming more like us until there's no difference anymore." The duplicate stepped closer. "Decide now. The loop is closing. Soon there won't be a choice left to make." Rebecca looked at Miguel. They'd built their entire adult lives around trucking. Their business, their income, their identity, it was all tied to the road. But as she looked at the duplicates, at what they might become if they stayed, she knew there was only one answer. "We're done," she said. "We're leaving the road. For good." Miguel nodded. "Agreed. We'll sell the trucks. Find something else to do. Whatever it takes." The duplicates smiled, and this time the smiles were genuine, relieved. "Then you're free." They turned and walked out of the building. Rebecca and Miguel followed them outside. The duplicates climbed into their trucks, started the engines, and pulled out of the rest area. As they drove away, they began to fade, becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone. The trucks vanished with them, leaving only tire tracks in the dust. Rebecca and Miguel stood in the parking lot watching the empty road. Then, without warning, the landscape shifted. The red rock formations dissolved. The strange sky normalized. They were suddenly back on I-90 in Montana at a normal rest area with normal traffic passing by on the highway. Their trucks sat where they'd parked them, solid and real. It was as if no time had passed at all. They checked their phones. The clock showed the same time it had been when the convoy had first formed hours ago. They'd lost no time, driven no impossible distance. But they both remembered every moment of what had happened. They completed that delivery to Atlanta, but it was their last long haul. They sold their trucks within a month, used the money to buy a small logistics company that operated locally, managing shipments but never driving them. Rebecca still dreams sometimes about the mirror convoy, about the endless roads that loop through places between reality. She wakes up grateful to be sleeping in a bed that doesn't move, in a house that stays in one place. Miguel doesn't talk about it much, but sometimes she catches him staring at highways in the distance. A look in his eyes that suggests he's seeing more than just asphalt and trucks. They broke free of the pattern, escaped the loop, but part of them will always be on that road, driving in perfect formation with shadows of themselves. The price of freedom was leaving behind the only life they'd ever known. But the alternative, becoming permanent residents of the road between roads, driving forever with their own reflections, was unthinkable. Some patterns, once established, can trap you forever if you don't have the courage to break them. Story 5. The Backwards Mile. Carl Morrison was 61 years old and had been trucking since he was 23. He'd seen trends come and go, technology evolve from paper maps to GPS, and countless changes in regulations and procedures. He was old school, the kind of driver who still kept a paper logbook as backup even though everything was electronic now. In his 4 decades on the road, he'd driven every major highway in the lower 48 states at least a dozen times. He knew the road like other people knew their hometown streets. Which is why what happened on Interstate 15 in Utah during November of 2021 shook him so deeply. Carl prided himself on never getting lost, never getting confused. The road was his domain. Until it wasn't. The haul was routine. Furniture from a warehouse in Los Angeles to retailers in Salt Lake City. Carl had driven I-15 through the Nevada-Utah corridor hundreds of times. He knew every mile marker, every exit, every truck stop. He left LA before dawn, made his usual stops, and was crossing into Utah by mid-afternoon. The weather was clear, traffic moderate, everything normal. Carl had his radar detector on, his CB radio monitoring the usual channels, his thermos of coffee in the cup holder. Just another day at work. He was about 60 miles south of Beaver, Utah, cruising at a steady 68 miles per hour, when he noticed something odd. The mile marker signs were counting down instead of up. He just passed mile marker 127, then 126, then 125. That was backward. Mile markers were supposed to increase as you traveled north through Utah. Carl frowned and checked his GPS. It showed him heading north on I-15, exactly where he should be, but the mile markers continued counting down. 124, 123, 122. Huh, Carl muttered. He grabbed his CB radio. Northbound on I-15 near mile marker 120. Anybody notice the markers are backward? Static answered him. He tried again. Any smokies listening? Got a question about mile markers. More static. The radio was on, transmitting, but no one was responding. Carl looked around. There were other vehicles on the highway, cars and trucks moving in both directions. Everything looked normal except for the mile markers. He passed 121, then 120. Carl pulled out his phone and tried to call his dispatcher. The call wouldn't go through. He tried his wife. Same result. The phone showed full signal strength but couldn't complete any calls. Carl's sense of unease deepened. He'd been in dead zones before, but this didn't feel like that. Something was fundamentally wrong. He watched the mile markers continue their backward countdown. 119, 118, 117. Then he noticed something else. The other vehicles on the road were moving in reverse. A sedan in the right lane was traveling backward at highway speed, its driver apparently unaware of anything unusual. In the opposite lanes, southbound traffic was also moving in reverse, forward in their direction of travel but backward in terms of vehicle orientation. Carl's hands tightened on the wheel. His truck was still moving forward normally, responding to his input as it should. But everything else was reversed. Okay, this is wrong, Carl said aloud. This is very wrong. He considered pulling over but decided against it. If he stopped, would he start moving backward too? Better to keep going, keep control. He watched his odometer. The numbers were increasing normally, showing him moving forward, but the mile markers kept counting down and the other vehicles kept traveling in reverse. At mile marker 115, he spotted a rest area sign, 1 mile ahead. Carl decided to take it to see if stopping and resetting would somehow fix whatever was happening. He took the exit, watching carefully. The exit ramp looked normal, curved in the right direction. But as he completed the turn and entered the rest area, everything flipped. Suddenly he was moving backward, not the truck, the world. The rest area buildings were approaching from behind him even though he was looking forward through the windshield. Carl felt a wave of vertigo so intense he thought he might pass out. He slammed on the brakes. The truck stopped. The world stopped spinning. Carl sat there, breathing hard, trying to orient himself. When he looked out the windshield, the rest area was in front of him again, normal, properly positioned. He looked in his mirrors. Behind him was the exit ramp, leading back to the highway. Everything looked right again. Carl put the truck in park and climbed down from the cab. His legs were shaky. The rest area was empty. No other vehicles, no people. Just the buildings, the parking lot, and a strange, pervasive silence. Carl walked around his truck, checking it over. Everything seemed fine. He tried his phone again. Still no calls would go through. He decided to use the restroom, then get back on the road and try to push through to Beaver. Maybe this was some weird localized phenomenon, some atmospheric condition affecting his perception. He walked to the restroom building. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was perfectly clean and maintained. Carl used the facilities, washed his hands, and stepped back outside. His truck was gone. The parking lot was empty. Carl stopped breathing for a moment. His truck, his livelihood, 40 feet of Peterbilt and 53 feet of trailer loaded with $200,000 worth of furniture. Gone. He ran to where he'd parked. There were no tire tracks, no indication anything had been there at all. Carl spun around, scanning the entire rest area. Empty. He started shouting. "Hello? Anybody? My truck's been stolen." His voice echoed strangely, the sound seeming to bounce back from directions that didn't make sense. He ran toward the rest area entrance, thinking maybe he'd see his truck on the highway being driven away. But when he reached the entrance, there was no highway. Just empty landscape, scrubland, and distant mountains. The road was gone. Carl stood there, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. How could an interstate highway just disappear? He turned back to the rest area. The buildings were still there, solid and real. He could see the restroom he'd just come from, the vending machine area, the picnic tables. But beyond the rest area's boundaries, there was nothing. No road, no traffic, no signs of civilization, just wilderness. Carl walked back to the center of the rest area and tried to think logically. He'd driven into the rest area, he'd parked, he'd gone to the restroom, he'd come out. The only variable was time. How long had he been in the restroom? It felt like 2 or 3 minutes, but maybe it had been longer. Maybe he'd experienced some kind of fugue state, lost time. He checked his watch. It showed 3:47 p.m., which matched his last memory of checking it before entering the restroom. But when he pulled out his phone, the time shown was 3:52 p.m. 5 minutes had passed. Carl looked at the date, November 11th, 2021. That was right, today's date. But as he watched, the date changed. November 12th, then November 13th. The days were rolling forward, accelerating. November 14th, 15th, 16th. Carl stared at the phone in horror. The date was cycling through days like a broken odometer. When it reached November 20th, it stopped. The time was now 3:53 p.m. A sound behind him made Carl turn. His truck was back, parked exactly where he'd left it. He ran to it, pulled the door open, climbed inside. Everything was as he'd left it, his coffee, his logbook, his GPS. He checked the GPS history. It showed him entering the rest area at 3:45 p.m. on November 11th. The current time, according to the GPS, was 3:53 p.m. on November 11th. But his phone insisted it was November 20th. Carl's head was spinning. Which was right? How much time had actually passed? He started the engine and pulled out of the rest area back onto the highway. The road was there again, I-15, traffic flowing normally. The vehicles were no longer moving in reverse. The mile markers were counting up properly as he traveled north. Everything seemed to have reset to normal. Carl accelerated to cruising speed, his eyes constantly checking every detail, looking for signs that reality might shift again. He passed mile marker 116, then 117, then 118. Going up now as they should. He passed the rest area he'd just left. He could see it in his mirror, receding behind him. Perfectly normal. But Carl couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. He drove on, making no more stops, pushing through to Salt Lake City in one shot. When he arrived at the warehouse for unloading, the receiving clerk looked at him strangely. "You're early," the man said. "You weren't scheduled until next week." "What are you talking about? It's November 11th. "It's November 4th, the clerk replied, showing Carl the date on his computer screen. Carl checked his phone. It showed November 4th. He checked his GPS, November 4th. His watch had reset as well, showing the earlier date, but Carl remembered driving on the 11th, remembered the backward mile markers, remembered 9 days passing in his phone while he stood in the rest area. Which memory was real? Had he somehow traveled backward in time? Or had he experienced a week and a half that then unmade itself, leaving him back where he'd started? The warehouse staff ultimately accepted the early delivery. Carl signed off on the paperwork, collected his payment, and drove his empty trailer to a truck stop. He sat in his cab that night, unable to sleep, going over every detail of what he'd experienced. The next morning, he checked into a cheap motel and stayed there for a week, watching the dates progress normally day by day until November 11th arrived. He half expected reality to shift again, to loop back, to reveal that he was trapped in some kind of temporal maze. But November 11th came and went without incident. Time moved forward in its proper direction. Carl completed a few more loads after that, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. The road, which had been his constant companion for nearly 40 years, now felt alien and threatening. How could he trust it when mile markers could reverse? When rest areas could disconnect from highways? When weeks could pass or unpass in moments? He'd always believed that the road was knowable, mappable, predictable. Now he understood that there were miles that existed outside, normal space and time, stretches of highway that could fold back on themselves, rest areas that served as waypoints between different versions of reality. He retired 6 months later, sold his truck, and bought a small house in Nebraska. But retirement didn't bring peace. Carl found himself obsessively researching temporal anomalies, reading physics papers he barely understood about time dilation and closed time-like curves. He searched online for other truckers who'd experienced similar events. He found a few stories buried in obscure forums, accounts that matched his own too closely to be coincidence. Other drivers who'd encountered the backwards mile, who'd lost time or gained it, who'd driven into rest areas and found themselves disconnected from the normal world. Carl started keeping a journal, documenting everything he remembered about that day on I-15. The more he wrote, the more details emerged from his memory. Small things he hadn't consciously noticed at the time. The way shadows had fallen at wrong angles. The way the air had tasted metallic. The way his skin had tingled, like static electricity building before a storm. He became convinced that he'd driven through some kind of fold in space-time, a place where the normal rules didn't apply, and he became equally convinced that it could happen again, to anyone, on any highway, without warning. Sometimes, late at night, Carl drives to the interstate overpass near his house and watches the trucks pass below. He wonders how many of them will encounter the backwards mile or something similar. He wonders how many drivers are out there right now, experiencing temporal anomalies they'll never be able to explain or prove. He thinks about the week and a half that he lived through and then didn't. The 9 days that passed on his phone while reality insisted only minutes had elapsed. Where did that time go? Does it still exist somewhere running parallel to this timeline, a version of November 2021 that Carl Morrison lived but that never officially happened? He has no answers, only questions that multiply the more he thinks about them. The road gave him a living for 40 years, but it also showed him something that human beings aren't meant to see. The malleability of time, the instability of space, the thin membrane between the world we think we know and the chaos that lurks beneath. Carl Morrison is retired now, safe in his house, far from any highway. But part of him is still driving I-15 through Utah, watching mile markers count backwards, trying to find his way back to a world that makes sense. He'll never know if he succeeded or if he's still trapped there, experiencing this retirement as a dream within a dream, a false reality conjured by whatever force controls the backwards mile. And that uncertainty, more than anything else, is what haunts him most. Story 6. The station that wasn't there. Denise Armstrong had been an independent trucker for 16 years, specializing in routes through the Pacific Northwest. She knew every truck stop, every way station, every good place to grab coffee between Seattle and Sacramento. In April of 2023, she picked up a load of lumber in Bellingham, Washington, headed for a construction site in Redding, California. It was a straightforward run down I-5, a route she'd driven at least 50 times before. The weather forecast was clear, traffic was expected to be light, and the pay was decent. Just another job in a career built on routine and reliability. Denise left Bellingham early in the morning, watching the sun rise over the Cascade Mountains as she drove south. The air was crisp and clean, the kind of perfect spring day that made her grateful she'd chosen a career that kept her outdoors and moving. She made her usual stop in Everett for fuel and a breakfast sandwich, chatted with a couple of other drivers she recognized, and got back on the road. By mid-morning, she was approaching Olympia, making excellent time. Just south of Tacoma, Denise noticed her fuel gauge was lower than she expected. She'd filled up in Everett less than 100 miles ago, but the gauge showed she was down to half a tank. That didn't make sense unless she had a leak, but she would have smelled diesel, would have seen it in her mirrors. She made a mental note to check the tank thoroughly at her next stop. About 20 miles later, the gauge had dropped to a quarter tank. Now Denise was genuinely concerned. A leak that severe would be obvious, catastrophic even. But there was no smell, no visible evidence of a problem. She decided to stop at the next service plaza. According to her GPS, there was a large truck stop coming up in about 10 miles just south of Centralia. But before she reached it, she saw a sign she didn't recognize. Bridgewater Station, fuel, food, rest, next exit. Denise frowned. She'd driven this stretch of I-5 countless times and had never seen a Bridgewater Station. But her fuel situation was becoming critical. The gauge now showed less than an eighth of a tank. Impossible given how recently she'd fueled. She took the exit. The off-ramp curved through a thick stand of Douglas fir trees, the canopy so dense that it blocked most of the daylight. When Denise emerged from the trees, she found herself at a large, modern service plaza. It was impressively well-maintained, with multiple fuel islands, a large convenience store, a restaurant, and what looked like a small motel attached. The parking lot was mostly empty, just 3 other trucks and a handful of cars. Denise pulled up to a diesel pump and shut off her engine. The silence was immediate and total. No highway noise, no sounds of other engines, nothing. Denise climbed down from her cab and looked around. The station was pristine, almost too clean. The pavement was unmarked, the paint on the buildings fresh and bright. It looked like it had been built yesterday. She walked to the pump and grabbed the nozzle. As she started fueling, she noticed there was no price display. The pump screen just showed gallons pumping, no dollar amount. She shrugged. Maybe she'd pay inside. While the tank filled, Denise walked toward the convenience store. Through the windows, she could see someone behind the counter, a young man in a green uniform. She pushed open the door and a bell chimed. The interior was spacious and well-stocked, aisles of snacks and drinks and travel supplies. But something felt off. The products looked slightly wrong. Familiar brands, but with packaging designs she didn't recognize, as if they were from different eras all mixed together. Some looked retro, like products from the 70s or 80s. Others looked futuristic, sleek and minimalist. The young man behind the counter smiled at her. "Good morning. Fueling up?" "Yeah, diesel at pump 3. How much do I owe you?" "Oh, there's no charge. Bridgewater Station provides complimentary fuel to qualifying travelers." Denise stared at him. "Complimentary? What does that mean?" "You're traveling through time, aren't you? Your fuel consumption doesn't follow normal physical laws. We provide services to travelers in your situation." Denise felt her stomach drop. "What are you talking about? I'm not traveling through time. I'm driving from Washington to California." The young man's smile didn't waver. "You left Bellingham at 7:15 this morning. You stopped in Everett at 8:30. You've been driving for 6 hours since then. But according to your dashboard clock, it's only 10:45. You're experiencing temporal compression. You're moving through time at a different rate than the space you're occupying." Denise wanted to argue, but she couldn't. She'd looked at her clock a dozen times during the drive. It had shown normal progression. But if this man was right, if she'd been driving for 6 hours instead of 2, then her fuel consumption made sense. How is that possible? Interstate 5 runs through several temporal anomaly zones in Washington and Oregon. Most people never notice because the discrepancies are small, a few minutes here or there. But sometimes, under certain atmospheric conditions, the effect amplifies. You drove through one of those amplification zones. You're currently about 4 hours ahead of your own timeline. Denise sat down on a bench near the door, her legs suddenly weak. So what happens now? Am I stuck like this? No. You'll resynchronize gradually as you continue south. By the time you reach Eugene, you'll be back in phase with normal time. But you need to be careful. If you try to contact anyone before you resynchronize, they'll tell you they spoke to you hours ago, conversations you haven't had yet from your perspective. It's disorienting for everyone involved. Why aren't there more stories about this? Why don't other drivers talk about it? Some do in certain circles, but most people rationalize it away. They convince themselves they misread their clocks, that they took longer naps than they thought, that their memory is faulty. The human mind doesn't like temporal paradoxes. It tries to smooth them over. The young man gestured around the store. Bridgewater Station exists specifically to help travelers who can't rationalize it away, who need confirmation that what they experienced was real. Denise stood up, walked to a refrigerated case, and grabbed a bottle of water. She took a long drink, trying to process everything. How long has this station been here? It's complicated. We exist in multiple time streams simultaneously. From your perspective, this is your first time seeing us. From our perspective, you've been here before or you will be. Time is less linear than people think. That doesn't answer my question. I know. Some questions don't have answers that make sense in conventional terms. The young man pulled out a map and spread it on the counter. Look, I can show you where the other anomaly zones are, help you avoid them on future trips. Or you can choose to forget this place, to rationalize it away like most people do. Either option is valid. Denise looked at the map. It showed I-5 with several sections highlighted in red. Each section was labeled with a type of anomaly: temporal compression, temporal dilation, causality loop, spatial displacement. There were dozens of zones scattered up and down the entire West Coast. If all these zones exist, how does anyone drive safely? Most people do because they don't perceive the anomalies. They drive through them and emerge fine on the other side, never knowing anything unusual happened. It's only people like you, people who notice the discrepancies, who need to understand what's really going on. Why me? Why do I notice when others don't? Sensitivity varies. Some people are more attuned to temporal irregularities. It's not a blessing or a curse, just a trait, like being able to see certain colors that others can't. The young man folded the map and handed it to her. Take this. Use it or don't, but at least you'll know. Denise took the map, tucked it into her jacket pocket. She wanted to ask more questions, but a strange lethargy was creeping over her, a sense that if she stayed much longer, she might never leave. I should get back on the road. Yes, you should. Drive safely, and don't worry about the 4 hours. They'll sort themselves out. Time has a way of healing its own wounds. Denise walked back to her truck, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. As she pulled out of the station and back onto the on-ramp, she looked in her mirrors. Bridgewater Station was gone. The exit was still there, the road she'd just driven on, but the station itself had vanished. In its place was just empty forest, as if no building had ever stood there. Denise accelerated back onto I-5, her heart pounding. She checked her dashboard clock. 11:15. She checked her phone. 3:23. The discrepancy was obvious now, undeniable. She was living 4 hours and 8 minutes ahead of her own timeline. Denise drove on, watching the clocks diverge and converge as she traveled. Sometimes her phone clock would jump forward suddenly, closing the gap. Other times it would slow down, allowing her dashboard clock to catch up. By the time she reached Eugene, both clocks showed the same time, 4:47 p.m. Denise pulled into a rest area and sat there for a long time, trying to decide if what she'd experienced was real. She pulled out the map the young man had given her. It was still there, still showing the anomaly zones. She took a photo of it with her phone, then folded it and put it back in her pocket. Over the next few days, as she completed her delivery and picked up a return load, Denise found herself checking the map frequently, planning routes that avoided the highlighted sections. It added time to her trips, sometimes significant amounts, but she felt safer, more in control. She never found Bridgewater Station again. She looked for it on subsequent trips down I-5, even took the same exit she remembered taking. But there was nothing there, just trees and an old logging road that dead-ended after a quarter mile. She searched online for any mention of Bridgewater Station. Nothing. She asked other drivers if they'd ever heard of it. They all said no. The only evidence it had ever existed was the map in her pocket and her memory of the conversation with the young man in the green uniform. Denise still drives I-5, still hauls freight up and down the West Coast. But she's more cautious now, more aware that the highways she travels aren't as stable or predictable as they appear. She watches her clocks compulsively, looking for discrepancies. Sometimes she finds them, small gaps, a few minutes here or there, and when she does, she pulls over and waits for them to resolve. She's learned that trying to push through an anomaly zone while temporally displaced can make things worse, can compound the distortions. Better to stop, to wait, to let time heal itself. Other drivers probably think she's paranoid, stopping for no apparent reason, checking and rechecking her dashboard. But Denise knows what she knows. She's seen the station that wasn't there, spoken to a man who existed in multiple time streams, received a map that shows the places where reality grows thin. She carries that knowledge with her every day, a burden and a gift. Most people drive through life assuming time moves at a constant rate, that cause reliably precedes effect, that the world operates according to rational principles. Denise Armstrong knows better. She's seen behind the curtain, and she can never unsee it. The road is stranger than anyone imagines, and Bridgewater Station, wherever and whenever it truly exists, stands as proof that our understanding of reality is far more limited than we'd like to believe. Story 7. The Convoy of the Lost. Gregory Walsh had been driving long haul for 27 years, and he'd developed a philosophy about the road. Mind your own business, stay out of other people's problems, and get your loads delivered on time. He wasn't unfriendly, just professional. He'd help a stranded driver change a tire or share coffee at a truck stop, but he didn't get involved in drama or mysterious situations. That policy served him well for nearly 3 decades. It failed him completely in January of 2022, on a stretch of Highway 87 in rural Texas. Gregory was hauling refrigerated pharmaceuticals from Dallas to San Antonio, running at night to avoid the heat of the day. It was around 2 in the morning and Highway 87 was nearly empty. Just Gregory, his headlights, and the occasional pair of taillights in the distance. The radio was playing classic rock quietly, and Gregory was in that state of relaxed alertness that comes from years of night driving. Then he saw the convoy. It appeared suddenly in his headlights. 4 trucks pulled over onto the shoulder in a perfect line, hazard lights flashing. As Gregory approached, he could see they were all identical, white Kenworths with blue lettering, though he couldn't make out the company name from this distance. His first instinct was to keep driving. 4 trucks, all together, all stopped. That suggested they had the situation under control, whatever it was. But as he passed the first truck, something made him look closer. The driver's window was open and he could see inside the cab. Empty. No driver. Gregory slowed down, checking each truck as he passed. All empty. All running, engines idling, hazard lights on, but no drivers anywhere. He pulled onto the shoulder about 100 yards past the last truck and sat there, debating. This violated his rule about not getting involved. But 4 abandoned trucks were a serious problem. Cargo theft, maybe. Or drivers who'd gotten food poisoning at the same truck stop and had to abandon their vehicles. He grabbed his CB radio. "Any units on Highway 87, this is southbound reefer at mile marker 173. Got 4 abandoned trucks here requesting any info." Static answered him. Gregory tried again. "Breaker, anybody on this channel?" Nothing. He switched frequencies, tried several different channels. All dead air. His cell phone showed no signal, not unusual in this part of Texas. Gregory grabbed his flashlight, climbed down from his cab, and walked back toward the convoy of trucks. As he got closer, he could hear something strange. A low humming sound, almost below the threshold of hearing. It seemed to be coming from all 4 trucks simultaneously. A harmonic vibration that made his teeth ache. The first truck's door was unlocked. Gregory opened it and shined his flashlight inside. The cab was immaculate, everything perfectly organized. A thermos sat in the cup holder, still warm. A half-eaten sandwich was on the passenger seat. The logbook was open, showing entries that ended mid-sentence, as if the driver had been writing and simply stopped. Gregory's unease deepened. He checked the trailer. Locked and sealed, no signs of forced entry. He moved to the second truck. Same situation, empty cab, engine running, everything in perfect order but no driver. The third and fourth trucks were identical. Gregory stood in the middle of the shoulder, surrounded by the 4 idling trucks, trying to make sense of it. Then he noticed something else. The road ahead was wrong. Where Highway 87 should have continued straight south, there was a curve. But Gregory knew this highway. There was no curve here. It was straight for the next 20 miles. He walked forward toward the curve, and as he got closer, he realized it wasn't a curve at all. The highway forked, splitting into 2 identical roads that ran parallel for a short distance before diverging. But Highway 87 didn't fork here. It never had. Gregory walked to the split, shining his flashlight down both routes. They looked identical. Same pavement, same lane markings, same everything. Except one led in a direction that shouldn't exist. He stood at the point where the road divided, trying to decide what to do. A sound behind him made him turn. The 4 trucks had moved. They were now positioned at the fork, 2 on one side, 2 on the other, as if forming a barrier. Gregory hadn't heard them move, hadn't seen anyone get in them. They'd simply relocated while his back was turned. His heart rate spiked. This was beyond strange. This was actively threatening. Gregory started walking quickly back toward his own truck, keeping the flashlight pointed behind him, watching for movement. The 4 trucks sat silent, hazard lights still flashing. When Gregory reached his cab, he climbed in, locked the doors, and started moving. He pulled back onto the highway, accelerating hard. In his mirrors, he watched the 4 trucks recede into the darkness. Then, impossibly, they were ahead of him again. All 4 trucks in their formation on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. Gregory slammed on his brakes, his trailer swaying dangerously. He sat there, breathing hard, staring at the trucks that couldn't possibly be there. His CB radio crackled to life. A voice, male, distorted, said, "Choose a path, driver, left or right, north or south, past or future, choose." Gregory grabbed the radio. "Who is this? What's going on?" "The road is split. You must choose which path to take. Most drivers never see the split. They drive through it without knowing, and chance decides which path they follow. But you stopped. You investigated. Now you must choose consciously. I choose to get off this highway. I choose to go back to Dallas. Not an option. Forward only. Choose." Gregory looked ahead at the fork in the road. Two identical paths. How was he supposed to choose when he had no information about where they led? What happens if I choose wrong? There is no wrong choice, only different destinations. One path leads to the world you know. One path leads somewhere else. Most who take the second path never realize they've left. Their world is so similar to the first that the differences seem insignificant. Small changes, slight alterations, but they compound over time until you wake up one day and realize nothing is quite right anymore. Gregory thought about that. A world almost like his own, but not quite. Would he even notice? How do I know which path is which? You don't. That's the nature of the choice. Some truths can only be discovered through commitment. Gregory sat there, engine idling, staring at the fork. The four white trucks sat silent, watching, waiting. He thought about his family, his life, everything he knew. If he chose wrong and ended up in a different version of reality, would that version of him have the same family? The same memories? Or would everything be subtly altered, familiar but foreign? The voice on the radio spoke again. Choose now, driver. The road is losing patience. Gregory pressed the accelerator and aimed for the left fork. As he passed through the split, he felt a sensation like driving through a waterfall. A moment of pressure, of resistance, and then he was through. The fork was behind him. Highway 87 stretched ahead, single and straight, exactly as it should be. The four white trucks were gone. Gregory checked his mirrors obsessively for the next 10 miles, but there was no sign of them. His CB radio was silent. His phone showed signal again. Everything seemed normal. He completed the delivery in San Antonio without incident, but the experience wouldn't leave his mind. Over the next few weeks, Gregory started noticing small things that seemed off. His favorite coffee brand tasted slightly different. The route from his house to the truck depot had an extra traffic light he didn't remember. His wife mentioned a vacation they'd taken that he had no memory of. Small things, easily dismissed individually. But they kept accumulating. Little discrepancies that suggested he might have chosen the wrong path after all. Or maybe, and this thought terrified him more, he'd chosen the right path. And these discrepancies were always there. Only now he was aware enough to notice them. Maybe everyone lived in a slightly different version of reality, shaped by choices they didn't remember making, by forks in roads they drove through without seeing. Maybe the convoy of the lost was always there on Highway 87, waiting for drivers to notice, to acknowledge that reality wasn't as solid as it appeared, that every journey involved choices between worlds that looked identical but weren't. Gregory still drives long haul, still takes loads across Texas and beyond. But he's changed. He notices things now that he never paid attention to before. Small shifts in the landscape, roads that seem to appear and disappear, moments when reality feels thin, like paper that could tear at any moment. He's tried going back to Highway 87 to the spot where the fork appeared, but it's never there. Just straight road, mile after mile, exactly as it's supposed to be. The four white trucks, the voice on the radio, the choice between paths, they existed for one night only. A test or a warning or something Gregory still doesn't fully understand. What haunts him most is not knowing whether he chose correctly. Is this his original world or the other one? Are the differences he notices evidence that he chose wrong or evidence that he's finally seeing clearly? There's no way to know, no way to test it. He's committed to this path now, this version of reality, whether it's the one he started in or not. And somewhere out there on highways across the country, other drivers are encountering their own forks in the road, their own moments of choice, their own convoys of the lost. Most will drive through without noticing. But some, like Gregory, will stop and investigate, will be forced to choose, and will spend the rest of their lives wondering if they chose wisely. The road always offers choices. most people never realize they're choosing. Gregory Walsh knows better now, and that knowledge is both a curse and a revelation he'll carry until his last delivery is made and his final mile is driven. Story 8. The Way Station Protocol. Sandra Liu had been an independent owner-operator for 13 years, running specialized equipment across the northeastern United States. She was meticulous about compliance. Her logs were always current, her permits always in order, her truck always maintained to the highest standards. She'd never had a serious violation, never tried to skip a way station or cut corners. That's why what happened at the way station on Interstate 81 in Pennsylvania during October of 2023 was so disturbing. Sandra had always played by the rules. She discovered that sometimes there are rules beyond the ones written in regulation books. The haul was straightforward: industrial printing equipment from a manufacturer in Syracuse, New York, to a facility in Roanoke, Virginia. Heavy equipment, properly secured, all paperwork in order. Sandra had been driving for 6 hours, making good time down I-81 through Pennsylvania. The weather was crisp and clear, traffic moderate. She saw the way station sign ahead. All trucks must enter. Standard procedure. Sandra moved into the right lane and began slowing down. The way station looked normal from a distance. A few scales, a small building, signs directing different classes of vehicles. But as Sandra got closer, she noticed something odd. The other trucks on the highway weren't pulling in. They were staying in the left lane, bypassing the station entirely. Sandra frowned. The sign clearly stated all trucks must enter and the station was open. She could see vehicles on the scales. But the other trucks were ignoring it completely. She considered following their lead, but her adherence to regulations was too deeply ingrained. If the sign said enter, she'd enter. Sandra pulled onto the way station access road and approached the scale. A uniformed officer was standing there with a clipboard, waving her forward. She drove onto the scale and waited. The officer walked to her window, and Sandra rolled it down. "Good afternoon, officer. Got my logs and permits here." The officer glanced at her documents without really looking at them. "Everything's in order, but you'll need to proceed to the inspection station." He pointed toward a large building set back from the main scales, partially hidden by trees. "Is there a problem with my load?" "Routine inspection shouldn't take long." The officer's face was expressionless, almost mechanical. Sandra felt a flicker of unease but suppressed it. Inspections happened. She'd been through dozens of them. She drove toward the inspection building, following the painted lines on the pavement. The building was larger than it had appeared from the scales, a sprawling concrete structure with multiple bay doors. One was open, and an officer inside was waving her in. Sandra pulled forward into the building. The bay door closed behind her immediately, cutting off the daylight. Industrial lights flickered on, harsh and bright. 2 officers approached her truck. "Driver, please step out and proceed to the waiting area. We'll need to inspect your cargo." Sandra climbed down, bringing her paperwork with her. One of the officers escorted her to a small room off the main bay, a windowless space with a table, 2 chairs, and nothing else. "Wait here. Someone will be with you shortly." "How long will this take? I've got a delivery schedule." "Shouldn't be long." The officer left, closing the door behind him. Sandra heard a lock engage. She tried the handle. Locked. Her unease blossomed into real concern. They'd locked her in an inspection room. That wasn't standard procedure. She pulled out her phone to call her dispatcher. No signal. She walked around the small room, holding her phone up, searching for any bars. Nothing. The walls were thick concrete, no windows. She was completely isolated. Sandra sat down at the table and tried to think logically. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe they'd locked the door by habit, not realizing she was in there. She knocked loudly. "Hello, officer? I need to make a phone call." No response. She knocked again, harder. "Hey, you can't lock me in here. This isn't legal." Silence. Time passed. Sandra checked her watch repeatedly. 10 minutes, 20, 30. No one came. She could hear sounds from the main bay, voices and movement, but couldn't make out words. She tried the door again, throwing her weight against it. It didn't budge. She was trapped, and no one seemed concerned about it. After an hour, Sandra heard the lock click. The door opened and a different officer entered. He was older, with gray hair and tired eyes. He sat down across from her. "Ms. Liu, I need to ask you some questions." "I need to ask you some questions. Why am I locked in here? What's going on?" "I'll explain everything, but first I need you to answer honestly. When you pulled into this way station, did you notice anything unusual about it?" Sandra thought back. The other trucks weren't stopping, they all bypassed it. And yet, you stopped. The sign said all trucks must enter. I follow regulations. The officer nodded, as if this confirmed something. "Ms. Liu, this isn't a normal way station. It doesn't appear on any official maps or documents. Most drivers don't see it. They drive right past without noticing. But some drivers, like you, do see it. And when they see it, they're compelled to enter." "What are you talking about? I'm looking at you. I'm looking at this building. It's real." "It is real. But it exists in a liminal space adjacent to the normal world, but not quite part of it. This way station serves a different purpose than checking compliance with transportation regulations." The officer pulled out a folder and opened it. Inside were photographs. Sandra leaned forward to look. They showed trucks, dozens of them, all parked in what looked like a massive warehouse. "These are vehicles that have been intercepted at this station. They were all carrying something they shouldn't have been. Not contraband in the legal sense, but things that shouldn't exist in the normal world." "That's insane. I'm carrying printing equipment, standard industrial machinery." "We've examined your cargo. It is printing equipment. But it's more than that. The machinery in your trailer has properties that violate causality. If it were delivered to its destination and put into operation, it would create temporal paradoxes. It would print things before they're written, reproduce documents that don't exist yet. Someone is trying to introduce a causality violation into the timeline, and you're the unwitting courier." Sandra stared at him. "This is crazy. I picked up this load from a legitimate manufacturer. I have all the documentation. The manufacturer exists, but it's being influenced by forces outside normal time. This is going to sound impossible, but there are entities that exist in non-linear time, experiencing past and future simultaneously. Occasionally, they try to alter the timeline for their own purposes. This way station exists to intercept those attempts." "And what happens now? You can't just keep me and my truck here." "We'll remove the problematic components from your machinery and replace them with standard parts. Your cargo will be delivered. Your timeline will continue normally." "But you need to understand something, Ms. Liu. You saw this way station because you have a sensitivity to temporal anomalies. Most people don't. That sensitivity means you'll see us again on other hauls, other routes, and each time you'll need to stop. It's not optional." "That's ridiculous. I have a business to run." "We know, and we'll make sure you're compensated for your time. The delays will be minimal, but your cooperation is essential. There are more attempts at timeline alteration than you'd imagine, and we need drivers like you, drivers who can see the stations, who follow the rules even when others don't, to help us intercept them." Sandra felt like she was in a nightmare. "What if I refuse? What if I never pull into another one of your stations?" "Then the violations will get through. Causality will be damaged. Small changes at first, but compounding over time until reality becomes unstable, and eventually it will collapse. We're not the villains here, Ms. Liu. We're the last line of defense between the normal world and temporal chaos. The officer stood up. You'll be released in 30 minutes. Your cargo will be ready to go. Think about what I've told you. And next time you see one of our stations, remember what's at stake. He left, leaving the door open this time. Sandra sat there, trying to process everything. It was insane. Impossible. But she'd seen the photographs, heard the conviction in the officer's voice. And deep down, she knew he was telling the truth. Some part of her had always sensed that reality was more fragile than it appeared, that time was more malleable, that there were forces working behind the scenes to keep everything from falling apart. True to the officer's word, Sandra was released 30 minutes later. Her cargo had been repaired, though she saw no evidence of any work being done. She completed her delivery in Roanoke. The receiving staff noticed nothing unusual about the equipment. Sandra filed her trip report, made no mention of the way station, and tried to convince herself it had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But 2 weeks later, on a different route, she saw another station. This one was on I-90 in Massachusetts. The sign said, "All trucks must enter." Other trucks bypassed it. Sandra pulled in, already knowing what she'd find. Different officers, different building, same protocol. They checked her cargo, found another attempted causality violation, corrected it, and sent her on her way. It happened again a month later, then 3 weeks after that. Sandra Liu had become an unwitting participant in a secret war to preserve the integrity of the timeline. She still drives, still runs her routes across the Northeast. But she sees things now that other drivers don't. Way stations that flicker in and out of existence. Roads that lead to places that shouldn't be there. Moments when time seems to skip or stutter. Evidence of violations that were caught and corrected before they could propagate. She's learned to recognize the signs, to anticipate when she'll be called to stop, to accept her role in this hidden system. The compensation the officer promised has appeared in her accounts. Small payments that exactly cover the time she spends at the stations, as if someone is tracking every minute and ensuring she doesn't lose money. She's tried researching the stations, looking for any official information about them. Nothing exists. They operate completely outside normal channels, invisible to everyone except those with the sensitivity to see them. Sandra has met other drivers at truck stops who have the same look in their eyes, the same awareness that the road contains more than it should. They never talk about it directly, but they recognize each other, nod in passing, share a silent acknowledgement of the burden they carry. Sandra Liu thought she knew what being a professional trucker meant. She thought it was about following regulations, maintaining equipment, delivering loads on time. Now she knows it's about something bigger. Being a guardian of causality, a defender of the timeline, a person who stands between reality and the forces that would tear it apart. Her truck carries freight, but it also carries responsibility for keeping the world stable and sane. Most drivers will never know how close they come to disaster, how many violations are intercepted before they can manifest. But Sandra knows. She sees the way stations, she follows the protocol, and she keeps driving day after day, knowing that every load might contain something that shouldn't exist. Every route might require her to stop at a station that isn't there for anyone else. The road has claimed her, not in the way she expected, but completely nonetheless. And she'll keep answering when duty calls, because the alternative, a world where causality collapses and time becomes meaningless, is too terrible to imagine. Story 9. The Delivery to Nowhere. Frank Patterson had been hauling freight for 31 years, and he'd delivered to every kind of location imaginable. Major distribution centers, tiny rural warehouses, construction sites in the middle of nowhere, even a few places that seemed deliberately hard to find. He prided himself on always finding the delivery address, no matter how obscure. In June of 2023, that pride led him to accept a load that would challenge everything he thought he understood about geography and reality itself. The job came through a broker he'd worked with before. Reliable, professional, always had good-paying loads. This one was medical equipment, a single large crate being shipped from a manufacturer in Phoenix to what the paperwork described as a remote research facility in northern New Mexico. The pay was excellent, almost suspiciously good for such a short haul. But the broker explained that the facility was difficult to access and they needed an experienced driver. Frank fit the bill perfectly. He picked up the crate, secured it in his trailer, and headed northeast out of Phoenix. The route took him through standard highways at first, Interstate 40 east, then smaller roads heading north into the sparse landscape of northwestern New Mexico. The GPS coordinates provided for the facility were specific, a location about 40 miles west of Farmington, in an area Frank had never been to before. As he got closer, the roads became progressively smaller and less maintained. Two-lane highways gave way to county roads, which gave way to gravel tracks. Frank's GPS kept insisting he was on the right path, counting down the miles to his destination. The landscape was increasingly desolate. Red rock formations, scattered juniper trees, occasional arroyos cutting through the terrain. Frank saw no signs of any research facility, no buildings of any kind, just empty land stretching to the horizon. His GPS showed him getting closer. 5 miles, then 3, then 1. Frank slowed down, scanning the landscape for any indication of where he was supposed to deliver. Then his GPS announced, "You have arrived at your destination." Frank stopped the truck and looked around. There was nothing here. Just a wide spot in the dirt road, surrounded by desert. No buildings, no signs, no indication anyone had ever been here. He checked the GPS coordinates again, matched them to his paperwork. They were exact. This was the location, but there was nothing to deliver to. Frank grabbed his phone to call the broker. No signal. He tried his CB radio. Static. He was alone in the middle of nowhere with a crate of medical equipment and no visible customer. He climbed down from the cab and walked around, looking for anything that might explain the situation. Maybe there was an underground facility, something not visible from the surface. But he saw no vents, no access hatches, no signs of construction or disturbance. Just undisturbed desert. Frank was standing there trying to decide what to do when he heard an engine. A vehicle was approaching from the direction he'd come, kicking up a plume of dust. It resolved into a white SUV with tinted windows. The SUV pulled up next to Frank's truck and stopped. 2 people got out, a man and a woman, both wearing white lab coats over casual clothes. They looked professional, official. The woman smiled at Frank. "Mr. Patterson, thank you for making the delivery. We apologize for the unconventional location." "Where's the facility?" Frank asked. "My GPS says this is the right place, but I don't see any buildings." "The facility is here," the man said. "You just can't perceive it yet. Would you mind opening your trailer so we can inspect the delivery?" Frank led them to the back of his trailer, unlocked it, and pulled open the doors. The large crate was there exactly as it should be. The 2 people climbed up and examined it, checking seals and documentation. They seemed satisfied. "Perfect," the woman said. "Everything's in order. We'll take it from here." "Take it where?" "There's nowhere to take it." "Mr. Patterson, what we're about to show you is confidential. You'll need to sign a non-disclosure agreement." The woman pulled out a tablet and brought up a document. Frank read through it quickly. Standard NDA language, nothing particularly alarming. He signed, wondering what he was getting into. The man gestured for Frank to follow them. They walked about 50 feet from the truck, to a spot that looked identical to every other spot in the area. The man pulled out what looked like a car key fob and pressed a button. The air in front of them shimmered, like heat rising from pavement. Then it cleared, and suddenly Frank could see a building. Not just any building, a massive complex, 3 stories tall, stretching for hundreds of feet. It had been there all along, invisible, hidden behind some kind of visual distortion field. "What the hell?" Frank breathed. "Adaptive camouflage," the woman explained. "The facility is always here, but perception filters prevent most people from seeing it. We can control who sees what. Now that we've keyed you in, you'll be able to perceive it normally." Frank stared at the building. It was ultra-modern, all glass and steel, completely at odds with the desert environment. There were vehicles parked near it, people moving around inside, all the signs of an active facility. "What is this place?" "That's classified, but we can tell you it's a research installation studying phenomena that exist outside normal perception. Things that are there but can't be seen, or can only be seen by people with specific training or equipment. Your delivery will help us continue that research." The man pulled out a tablet and showed Frank a payment confirmation. "Your broker has been notified of successful delivery. You're free to go." Frank wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand what he'd just seen. But the 2 researchers were already walking back toward his truck, preparing to unload the crate. Frank followed, watching as they used a forklift that had apparently been inside the invisible building. They removed the crate from his trailer, thanked him professionally, and drove the forklift back toward the facility. As Frank watched, they crossed the threshold where the building started. From the outside, it looked like they were driving into empty air, but Frank could see them inside, moving through a loading dock, disappearing into the interior. He closed up his trailer, climbed back into his cab, and started the engine. As he drove away, he kept checking his mirrors. The building remained visible for about a quarter mile, then suddenly wasn't there anymore. The desert was empty again, as if nothing had ever existed there. Frank drove back to the main highway in a daze, trying to process what he'd experienced. An invisible building, perception filters, research into phenomena outside normal perception. It sounded like science fiction, but he'd seen it with his own eyes. Over the next few weeks, Frank couldn't stop thinking about the facility. He researched online, looking for any information about hidden research installations in New Mexico. He found plenty of conspiracy theories and speculation, but nothing concrete. He tried going back to the location using the GPS coordinates from his delivery. When he got there, the spot was empty, just desert. He walked around, looking at the ground from different angles, trying to trigger the perception filter. Nothing. The building remained invisible, if it was even still there. The broker called him a month later with another delivery to the same facility. Frank accepted immediately. This time, when he arrived at the coordinates, he could see the building right away. The perception filter recognized him, remembered him. The same 2 researchers met him, collected the delivery, thanked him, and sent him on his way. It became a regular route. Once every few weeks, Frank would haul equipment or supplies to the invisible facility in New Mexico. He became one of a handful of drivers who knew it existed, who could perceive it, who were trusted with its location. Frank learned not to talk about it. The one time he mentioned it to another driver, describing the invisible building, he got looks that suggested people thought he was losing his mind. So he kept silent. Just did the deliveries, collected his pay, and tried not to think too hard about the implications. If there was one invisible building, were there others? How many things existed in the world that people couldn't perceive? How much of reality was hidden behind filters and distortions visible only to those who were keyed in? Sometimes, driving through empty landscapes, Frank finds himself wondering what else is out there, unseen. Are there entire communities that exist outside normal perception? Are there roads that only certain people can see? Are there layers of reality stacked on top of each other, separated only by the limitations of human perception? He has no answers, only questions that multiply the more he thinks about them. The facility in New Mexico proved that reality is far more complex than it appears, that there are things hiding in plain sight. Invisible not because they're not there, but because our brains filter them out. Frank Patterson still drives, still makes his regular deliveries to the facility that doesn't exist on any map. He's seen things now that most people will never see, knows secrets that most people will never know. That knowledge has changed him, made him more aware of the possibility that everything he perceives might be incomplete, filtered, edited by forces he doesn't understand. The road used to be simple. Just highways connecting places, carrying freight from point A to point B. Now Frank knows that some destinations exist outside the normal world, accessible only through specific coordinates and perception filters. He's become a courier between the visible world and the invisible one, a bridge between what everyone knows exists and what only a few can see. And every time he makes that delivery, every time the building appears out of empty air, he's reminded that reality is not as solid or as obvious as most people believe. There are hidden places, secret facilities, entire layers of existence that remain invisible until someone decides to show them to you. And once you've seen them, once you know they're there, you can never quite look at the empty spaces the same way again. Story 10. The Eternal Traffic Jam. Vincent Torres had been a long-haul trucker for 18 years, and he thought he'd experienced every kind of traffic delay imaginable. Construction zones, accidents, weather-related slowdowns, even a few truly bizarre incidents involving escaped livestock and overturned honey trucks. But nothing prepared him for what happened on Interstate 10 in Louisiana during July of 2022. Vincent encountered traffic that wasn't just slow, it was stopped, completely, utterly stopped. And it had been stopped, he would discover, for far longer than should have been possible. The load was automotive parts, heading from a plant in Houston to a distribution center in Mobile, Alabama. Vincent left Houston early in the morning, planning to make it to Mobile by late afternoon. I-10 through Louisiana was usually straightforward, if a bit monotonous. Flat, straight, endless views of swampland and pine forests. Vincent had driven it dozens of times. He knew where the good rest stops were, where the speed traps tended to hide, where traffic typically slowed down. This trip started no different from any other. About 30 miles past Lake Charles, Vincent saw brake lights ahead. A lot of brake lights. Traffic was slowing from 70 miles per hour down to 50. Then 30, then crawling. Vincent sighed. Probably an accident or construction. He'd sit in traffic for 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. Then it would clear up. He grabbed his phone to check traffic apps, but they weren't loading. No data connection, though his signal showed full bars. That was odd. He tried refreshing. Nothing. His GPS wasn't updating either, stuck showing his last position before the slowdown. Traffic came to a complete stop. Vincent put his truck in neutral and waited. He could see other trucks ahead of him, cars and SUVs, a complete mix of vehicles all stopped on the highway. After 10 minutes with no movement, Vincent grabbed his CB radio. "Eastbound on I-10, anybody know what's causing this backup?" A voice responded immediately. "Been here for 3 hours, friend, nobody knows. No accident visible, no construction, no explanation, just stopped." 3 hours? Vincent was incredulous. "Have you tried calling anyone?" "Phones don't work, can't get calls out. CB works for local communication, but we're all stuck together." Vincent tried his phone again. Same result. Full signal, but no connection. He tried calling his dispatcher, his wife, even 911. Nothing went through. He climbed down from his cab and walked forward, trying to see what was causing the blockage. Other drivers were standing outside, their vehicles talking in small groups, all looking confused and frustrated. Vincent joined a group of 3 truckers standing near a flatbed. "How long have you guys been here?" One of them, a woman in her 50s, looked at her watch. "I stopped at 9:17 this morning. It's now 2:43, 5.5 hours. That can't be right. There'd be emergency vehicles, police, something. You can't just close an interstate for 5 hours without explanation." "And yet here we are," another driver said. He was younger, maybe 30, with a nervous energy about him. "I walked forward about a quarter mile. The traffic just keeps going. Vehicles stopped as far as I could see. No crash, no construction equipment, nothing, just stopped cars and trucks." Vincent decided to investigate himself. He walked along the shoulder, passing vehicle after vehicle. People were sitting in their cars, some reading, some sleeping, most just looking bored and frustrated. He walked for what he estimated was half a mile. The line of stopped traffic continued, disappearing around a curve in the distance. No police, no emergency vehicles, no explanation. Vincent turned back, an uneasy feeling growing in his chest. When he returned to his truck, he checked his watch and his phone. His watch showed that 40 minutes had passed during his walk. But his phone, when it finally refreshed, showed that 3 hours had passed. Vincent stared at the discrepancy, trying to make sense of it. His watch had been keeping time normally. His phone was showing time moving much faster. Unless his watch had stopped and he hadn't noticed, he held the watch to his ear, still ticking, running normally. He asked the woman trucker what time she had. She checked her watch and phone. Same discrepancy. Watch showing one time, phone showing hours later. "Something's wrong with time here," she said quietly. "We're experiencing it normally, but the outside world is moving faster. Or we're moving slower. I don't know which." Vincent felt his scalp prickle. He'd heard stories from other drivers, legends about stretches of highway where weird things happened. He'd always dismissed them as tall tales, exaggerations. But this was real, happening to him right now. "Has anybody tried walking back, leaving the traffic jam?" "A few people tried," the nervous younger driver said. "They walked west, back the way they came, trying to find help. None of them came back. Maybe they found help and it's on the way. Maybe. Or maybe something else happened to them." The young driver looked genuinely frightened now. "I think we're trapped here. I think this traffic jam is some kind of anomaly and we're stuck in it." Vincent wanted to argue, to insist there had to be a rational explanation. But the evidence was mounting against rationality. Time was passing differently. Communications didn't work. Nobody was coming to help despite hours of waiting. And people who tried to leave didn't return. Vincent walked back to his truck and climbed inside, trying to think. He pulled out his logbook and made an entry, documenting everything. The time he'd stopped, the time discrepancy, the lack of explanation. If nothing else, he'd have a record. Hours passed. Vincent's watch showed it was now late afternoon. His phone showed it was past midnight the next day. Other drivers were starting to panic, shouting at each other, demanding answers nobody had. Some people tried to drive on the shoulder to go around the stopped traffic. They'd make it maybe 20 or 30 yards before their vehicles would stall out, engines dying for no mechanical reason. When they'd back up to their original position, the engines would start again. It was as if they were confined to specific spots, unable to leave the formation of stopped vehicles. As what Vincent's watch indicated was evening approached, the sky started doing something impossible. Instead of darkening uniformly, patches of the sky turned dark while other patches remained light. It looked like someone was dimming the world in sections with no regard for how sunsets actually worked. Stars appeared in the dark patches, but not familiar stars. The constellations were wrong, patterns Vincent had never seen. Other drivers noticed too, pointing and murmuring in confusion and fear. Then the vehicles started disappearing. Not all at once, but gradually. A car 3 vehicles ahead of Vincent simply wasn't there anymore. One moment it existed, stopped in traffic like everything else. The next moment there was a gap in the line and the vehicles on either side had moved closer together to fill the space. Nobody seemed to notice except Vincent. He watched in horror as more vehicles vanished, a pickup truck, an SUV, another semi. Each time the remaining vehicles adjusted, the traffic jam compacting, and nobody reacted. It was as if the disappeared vehicles had never been there at all. Vincent climbed down from his cab and grabbed the arm of the woman trucker who'd been here for 5 hours. "The vehicles are disappearing, don't you see it?" She looked at him with confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Cars and trucks, they're vanishing from the traffic jam. There were dozens more vehicles a few minutes ago." She looked around, seemed to count, then shook her head. "Looks the same to me. You okay? The stress might be getting to you." Vincent realized with creeping horror that the disappearances were affecting memory as well as physical reality. When a vehicle vanished, people's memories adjusted to accommodate its absence. They couldn't remember it had ever been there. He was witnessing reality editing itself in real time, and he was the only one who could see it happening. Why him? Why wasn't his memory being affected? More vehicles disappeared. The traffic jam was half the size it had been when Vincent first stopped. Soon, he realized, his truck would vanish too, and nobody would remember he'd been there. He'd be erased from reality, removed from this stretch of I-10 as if he'd never existed. Vincent felt panic rising. He had to do something, had to break free of whatever force was holding them here and slowly deleting them from existence. He climbed back into his cab and started his engine. This time, instead of trying to drive forward on the shoulder, he turned the wheel hard and drove directly into the median. His truck bounced and tilted dangerously as it crossed the grass and drainage ditch. Alarm sounded, his trailer swayed, but he kept going. He crossed into the westbound lanes, which were completely empty. No stopped traffic on this side, just empty highway stretching to the horizon. Vincent accelerated, driving west now, back the way he'd come. In his mirrors, he watched the eastbound lanes. The traffic jam was still there, getting smaller as he gained distance. Then it started to fade, becoming translucent, ghostly. Within minutes, it was gone entirely. The eastbound lanes were empty, as if there had never been any stopped traffic at all. Vincent's hands were shaking on the wheel. He'd escaped somehow. But those other drivers, those dozens or hundreds of vehicles, had they disappeared? Were they still trapped in some pocket of abnormal space, slowly being deleted from reality? Vincent drove straight through to the nearest town, pulled into the first business he found, and asked to use their phone. He called the Louisiana State Police, reported a massive traffic jam on I-10 east of Lake Charles. The dispatcher checked and said there were no reports of any traffic issues on that stretch. Vincent insisted. The dispatcher politely suggested he might be mistaken. When Vincent got back in his truck and checked his phone, the date was July 19th, the same day he'd entered the traffic jam. According to his watch, it was now July 20th, but his phone insisted no time had passed at all. He abandoned the load, drove straight home to Houston, and parked his truck. He couldn't complete the delivery, couldn't even explain to his dispatcher what had happened. How could he? He'd lost a day that hadn't actually passed, escaped from traffic that apparently never existed, watched reality delete itself vehicle by vehicle. His dispatcher was furious about the abandoned load, threatened to blacklist him. Vincent didn't care. He was alive, still existing, and that was more than he could say for the other drivers who'd been trapped in that eternal traffic jam. Vincent never drove I-10 through Louisiana again. He plotted routes that added hours to his trips just to avoid that stretch of highway. He retired 2 years later, unable to shake the memory of what he'd seen. Sometimes he searches online for missing person reports, looking for the other drivers who were trapped with him that day. He never finds anything. It's as if they never existed at all, erased so completely that even their families don't remember them. Vincent Torres knows he witnessed something impossible, something that violated every law of physics and logic. He saw reality unmaking itself, deleting people and vehicles from existence while simultaneously erasing any memory that they'd ever been there. He escaped only by breaking the rules, by driving where he shouldn't have, by refusing to accept the boundaries of the anomaly. And he lives now with the knowledge that highways can become traps, that traffic jams can last forever in no time at all, and that existence itself is more fragile than anyone wants to admit. The road claims people every day in accidents and mishaps. But Vincent knows that sometimes the road claims people in ways far stranger and more permanent, simply deleting them from reality as if they never mattered, never existed, never drove that final mile into oblivion.